Good morning, everybody tuning in. I hope that wherever you are, you're safe and you are well. For those of you who don't know, my name is Tala Odeh, and I'm Head of Capability Development here at Cosmic Centaurs. We are a leadership and organizational development firm based in the GCC. And today you're joining us for the second webinar of our annual Cosmic Conference. It's a 3-week virtual conference taking place this year between March 25th and 17th. We usually run this in October, but given the pace and the gravity of events unfolding across the region, it was super clear to us that this conversation couldn't wait. To support leaders when they need it most, we chose to bring this year's edition forward and have this conversation now. The conference this year is titled Grounded and Limitless, Leading Organizations that Survive and Thrive. And through this conference, we're hoping to support leaders as they navigate what a lot of us are experiencing, and that's a period of prolonged uncertainty. At its core, this idea of being grounded and limitless is about staying clear-eyed about reality while continuing to build what's possible and looking forward. And so to explore this, we don't have the answers. We're bringing together experts, leaders, academics, practitioners to collectively make sense of this and what leadership is asking for in this moment. So we'll be doing this across 3 themes. Each week has a theme. So week 1, where you are tuning in for, is endure. How do we survive periods of uncertainty? How do we get through this? Week 2 is about adapting. How do we evolve in response to all of this change? And week 3 is thrive. How do we turn the lessons that we can glean from this crisis into a competitive advantage, emerging stronger and more innovative and better prepared for the future? As I said, you are tuning into week 1, endure. It's all about helping leaders face reality, preserve stability, and try and protect what matters most in moments of prolonged stress. And we have around 8 webinars this week and 1 workshop. Our team, Zaina, will be dropping the links to the program below. And I have with me today Claire. Hi, Claire. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Claire and I would love for you to actively participate in this session. We are going to have a conversation, but we absolutely want to make sure that you gain something out of this. And so if you have a reflection, a question, an experience that you want to share, please use the chat and we'll bring those into our conversation. If you do know somebody, a leader who might be trying to navigate how to communicate in times of crisis, please tag them. Hopefully they can still tune in. And if you do find value in this session today and you want to give back in some way, these webinars are of course free to attend, but we have one ask. Please take our survey. We are conducting primary research to capture how leaders in the region are navigating uncertainty. It's part of our broader research around leadership from the Arab world. We want to export what the rest of the world can learn from us here. And so Zaina and the team will drop that link in the chat. And we really would love for you to take a few minutes and help us with that. Today's session, empathy and direction, leadership communication in times of uncertainty. Actually, it's a topic that's very close to home for me. I started my career in communications and reputation management, working at organizations such as Ogilvy, Ketchum, and at Ahmad. And I had a quite unique experience in working on multiple crises that were, happened in that decade, from the Johnson & Johnson Absistos lawsuits to the Samsung phones, to helping Ammar navigate all entities in the global pandemic. A lot of my role was spent helping leaders figure out how to show up in moments when the answers weren't clear, when there was, lots of uncertainty in the context, and whether that is what to say, how to say it, to the press, in writing, to their teams. It was such a big part of my career. And so today's conversation is to help everybody else who's doing that. I worked with one leader who every Monday morning actually had a Post-it note that he handed to me. And I had to not just write the topics of what he would be sharing with the team huddle, but the cues. Say this slowly, lean into enthusiasm here, celebrate the success. It wasn't about just the message, it was about how they were showing up. And today, a lot of leaders are asking themselves that question: how do I show up? What should I say? They're asked to provide clarity and make decisions, but they don't have all the answers themselves. And a lot of our attendees, if this sounds familiar, our hope today is that in our conversation with Claire, we are going to be able to offer you that and explore that together. We'll do it in 4 parts, actually. The first will be, today's context. What are the shifts that are happening? What should we prioritize? How do we leverage communication as a tool that can help us as leaders? And how do we balance our tone and our audiences and create a cadence and structure for this approach? So without further ado, It brings me great pleasure to introduce Claire. Claire Furlong is a partner at FGS Global, where she advises organizations on strategic communications in high stakes and complex environments. She brings extensive experience in global comms, having previously served as general manager of marketing and communications at the International Cricket Council, where she led communications across major international events and moments of heightened scrutiny. Before that, Claire held senior roles across leading sports organizations, including UK Athletics and Hanover Sport, and has led communications for global campaigns and events such as the London World Athletics Championships and the Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games. Her career spans journalism, consultancy, and leadership roles, giving her a unique perspective on how communication shapes trust, reputation, and performance, especially in moments of uncertainty. Claire, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
I think we need to start with where we are today. You and I are both based here in the UAE, and given everything and how it's unfolding, leaders are wondering, how do we show up? How do we set the right tone? How do we make sure that we are a tool and kind of like a lighthouse for our teams, stable and offering direction and clarity? You have no shortage of amazing experience, and I'd love for you to tell us. A good place to start today would be, all these different contexts, global organizations, and also the UAE government and how they've responded to communicate in this prolonged crisis. What are you seeing? What is different about how it's been done before? What can you tell us about how it looks like from a comms lens?
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned there the various crises you've been involved in over the years, and similar to that, I've been involved in a number of crises, but this one seems like the biggest any of us have ever been involved in. The global ramifications are enormous, and many of us have found ourselves in a situation that we just, not only have we never been in before, but we never would have expected to be in. We've had decades and decades of relatively peaceful times across most of the world, notwithstanding our neighbours in Lebanon and other places. But it's never a situation that we would have thought we would find ourselves in. And I think what we're seeing here, and I'm looking at this through a very UAE-based lens, is some really outstanding communications from the UAE authorities, which is contrary to what you might read in the Western media. But I think that's a result of longevity and leading through good times and bad. And I think, they've led us through this huge decade or so of growth, couple of decades of growth, led us through COVID, the floods of 2024, and they've built trust amongst their citizens over that period of time. And I've been here a long time. I've been here over 10 years. And what I've seen, and what I've particularly seen during this current situation, the current conflict, is this real shift from a more closed communication to greater transparency and openness and greater willingness to communicate with the citizens of the UAE. We've seen some really clear, consistent messaging, which I think trust levels, and I wasn't able to find any polls on this around trust levels of the UAE government, but I think trust levels would have been incredibly high pre this, and I think they would probably be higher now. And that trust has enabled the government to be really clear and consistent in their communications and reduce panic. I think many of us have said, okay, we'll stay. We trust the government to look after us and protect us. And they've been doing that every day. And they've been telling us what they've been doing every day. So I think they've got the balance right between the amount of information they're giving us. Frankly, personally, I don't want too much information because that will lead me to overthinking, but I need enough to know that they're in control. So I feel like they're giving us as much clarity as they can. And I think what we're seeing as well, which is really important at times of crisis, is a really strong alignment between what is being said and what is actually being done. And I think the final thing that they've got really, really well is a chorus of voices and consistency of message across that chorus of voices. So you've got the leadership and the government who are talking, and I can't speak more highly of Reem, who is just, I think, an incredible ambassador for this country, but also the other leaders. We saw Sheikh Hamdan today come out and talk about the billion dirham rescue package for businesses and things like that. So, but then what we're also seeing, they are activating high-level advocates and stakeholders across business in the UAE who are also speaking with a very consistent message. And that is building the trust and building the belief that we've got in the authorities here.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much. I resonate with a lot of what you said as somebody who's grown up here and through 2008, the pandemic, like you're saying, the floods. You know, we have such a beautiful example of true leadership, and the way in which they communicate and how they show up is so nice. And what you said about a chorus, it's so true. Actually, one thing that it reminded me of is how in one of the initial press conferences, Her Excellency Rima Hashmi was sharing, she was speaking with such a calm and composed voice. She had such grace in such a context of war, and it just brought so much clarity and reassurance. And then a few days ago, I saw Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber's acceptance speech. She was in Washington, D.C., accepting an award. He had a completely different tone. He was strong and assertive and powerful and really like reassuring. And so what I was just taken aback by was how they are clearly all singing from the same song sheet, and that they really like, it's so clear that we're all aligned. And the message is just delivered in a different way, but it's authentic to that person and to that leader. And it gives us confidence, and it's such a beautiful example of the range leaders can have in conveying a message in such a way that, you know, it gives you the right outcome, but that feels true to them. And I'd love to kind of now, like, that we agree that the UAE has just done such a remarkable job in really helping us carry ourselves, you know, as residents and citizens through this uncertainty. How does that compare to what you've seen in other governments or large organizations when dealing with a crisis? Maybe you have an example or two from your experience that stands out. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, as I was preparing for this, I was like, oh, crikey, you could list out a load that have done it well, a load that have done it badly. But I think the consistent theme for those that have done it well is organizations who show pace and grace. You use the word grace there. And it's understanding that a crisis is no longer the media moment that it used to be. It just used to be a media moment. And there was a phrase in the UK sort of 20 years ago, it's tomorrow's fish and chip paper, don't worry about it. Yeah. And that's no longer the case. And what happens now is the crisis becomes an entire narrative, and it attaches itself to your brand, your government, your country, and those narratives can stay alive. And the trick is to move fast, reduce uncertainty, and take control of that narrative as best you can. And that's what I think the UAE government have done so well. And I think, you know, if you compare that to the British government during COVID, and there was Partygate, where the Prime Minister hosted his own birthday party in the garden of number 10 and then lied about it. And I think 80 something people got charged with breaking the law. And then Contractgate, where I think 30 billion British pounds worth of contracts were awarded without any sort of competition or procurement process. And we saw the Prime Minister at the time become the only sitting Prime Minister ever in the UK to be charged with breaking a law. And at that point, so by February 2022, more than 3/4 of British people did not trust the government. And that was because they handled it so badly. There was no pace, there was no grace, it was defensive, it was arrogant. And the trust fell out the bottom, the British public's trust fell out at the bottom of the government. And I don't think that's ever been rebuilt. And I think there's one example that I'll share, which I think is a great example of doing things terribly to start with, but then pivoting to a good point, because I think it's really important. You know, we can hold up all of these case studies that are outstanding or just terrible, but I think the really interesting ones is when they realize that they've handled something terribly, and then they pivot and change the entire narrative. And that was back in 2022, UEFA Champions League final was held in Paris, and there was a lot of dangerous crowd congestion. The police were very heavy-handed towards the fans. There was tear gas, and the initial blame from both UEFA, who were the event owner, and the French police was the fans were to blame. There were fans without tickets that were trying to push in. And actually, it turns out that was entirely contrary to what had happened. So UEFA grabbed hold of this blame the fans narrative. And there is a history with Liverpool Football Club, which I think they lent on in very much the wrong way. And it was awful. It was like, I could sit back and say, why are you handling it like this? This is terrible. But then what they did well was they pivoted. They recognized they'd got that early narrative very, very wrong. Their tone was terribly defensive, not our fault, terrible fans. But then as the situation evolved, it became very clear that they'd got it wrong, and they acknowledged that publicly. And they said, okay, we need to do something about this. They moved very quickly towards a more accountable stance. They commissioned an independent inquiry, and then they accepted responsibility after that inquiry and said, okay, here are our actions to get it right going forward, and we are sorry. And so I think it's really interesting that if you find yourself in the eye of a storm, maybe not the best phrase to use in the region right now, but and you find yourself going down a very negative narrative, you can arrest that and you can stop that and you can step back and you can shift the narrative and pivot. You don't have to stay stuck there. And I think that's often where people make mistakes, is they think, oh, we're in it now, we're stuffed. And actually, I think you can move quickly to change the narrative.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Actually, I think yesterday Sandra Salama was talking to us about your response in the crisis and how you can freeze, you can flight, or you can fight. And freeze often happens, especially when leaders feel like they have to make big decisions about how they're going to navigate, and communicate in the crisis. Actually, a lot of times they hold up. They're like, well, let's wait. Well, let's wait until we have more information. Well, let's wait till this dies down. Let's wait till it's, as you said, the fish and chips paper tomorrow. You can't. Actually, I think what you're saying is how we can be agile, and fully agree. I mean, if comms teaches you anything, it's that when you own the narrative, you control it, and you need to be doing what you can to put things out there. There's great examples, I mean, and bad examples. And I think at the organizational level, as we covered, and also at the national level, it's so clear how you can really, it's trust. It's that sentiment that really is what the metric is, what we're looking to preserve the trust, to preserve the confidence. Actually, I think a lot of times, like, you'll be forgiven if people feel like you've taken a misstep, but you've shown up and they trust that you're going to do your best to get it right next. I want to ask you, as somebody who's led teams and organizations, how do you, as Claire, personally approach these moments? What have you found worked best when you're communicating, not at the national level, not at the org level, but to your teams and to your people and different stakeholders that you have to answer to?
Yeah, I think the crucial thing here is be prepared. It's the boring answer to all of crisis, but it's the most important. Preparation will stand you in really good stead. And then I think it's operating as a leadership collective. There is no point in silos or just relying on the CEO or just communicating with your team directly, because then teams are hearing different messages. So you've got to operate as a really tightly aligned collective. There's got to be consistency of comms with staff and stakeholders. There's got to be regularity of comms. I've seen all too often, well, okay, we've communicated that. Okay, tick box, move forwards. No, you've got to, particularly in an environment like this, you've got to communicate regularly with your staff and your stakeholders. And then to your point about authenticity of the UAE leaders, be human. I think it's so easy in this environment to go into robot mode, and that helps. That's important. But when you are dealing with your staff, these are the people that make your business successful. These are the people that deliver for you. Have a human lens, and understand that we're all going through different things, whether it's juggling small people home learning, juggling floods, whilst many of us have done that over the last week in this region. But be human, and be human in your delivery as well. It's all very well to have a crib sheet of what you're going to say, but don't just read it out. Like you said with your Post-it and your old boss, that they've got to lean into it. They've got to have that empathy and be human.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that when we work with leaders, a lot of times, like whether it's preparing them to get up onto a keynote or to help their team, we ask them, the first question is like, well, what do you want to say? How do you want to show up? Helping them really work through that intentionality. Like, what feels natural for you, Claire, today in the context? Like, do you want to walk? If I quoted this yesterday, I'll say it again. Maria Beladi always says this: if your energy entered the room before you, what would it say? And that really helps leaders think about, well, how am I showing up? And then what do I want to say? Because so much of how leaders communicate isn't just in the words, because anybody could say that. And with AI and ChatGPT could generate no shortage of words. But are you going to have that check-in? Um, are you going to pose a question? Are you going to, bring the positivity? Is that what your team needs? I think like sensing that and responding in that way is something that when we work with leaders, helps. And honestly, for our team on that first Monday coming back, like we did not do business as usual. I think there's like that acceptance that we're not here for business. Like we need to take a minute to say like, I might really be itching to ask you about the update on this deliverable, but I need to make sure that you're doing well right now. And it's my job, it's my responsibility as a leader. So yeah, really echo that. And I definitely want us to talk about this collective alignment piece that you mentioned. I want us to jump there. It's such an important one because a lot of time, like, leadership teams, they need to sing from the same song sheet. You can't have an organization's different departments with different messaging, different approaches. It creates, like a very disjointed experience, let's say. I'm going to come back to it. It's a question I want to ask you, but maybe before that, why is communication that lever of uncertainty? Like, why is it so important for leaders and nations and leadership teams to get comms right? How is it a tool in these moments? I would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, look, I think communication is one of the most important levers a leader will have, and even more so in a time of crisis. Crisis, by its definition, is a moment of uncertainty. We don't know. So communications gives us really our only chance of creating clarity. And we won't be able to provide total clarity, but it gives us an opportunity to try and provide it, internally, externally. People might want meaning. They might just want reassurance. But the comms gives us that chance to talk about clarity, and leaders have to balance the need for that clarity without having all the answers themselves. And that's where the being human is all about, because it's not necessarily about having all the information. It's about steadying the ship. It's about reducing the panic. It's about saying we're here. It's checking in. Every conversation I have at the moment, it starts with, "Are you okay? How are you feeling?" And and I've had some of my team that have just said, "I can't get my head around this," and I'm like, "Okay, just go offline for a couple. Just that's the only thing to do, and then come back." But I think the interesting thing around comms is BAU comms is planned. It's very strategic, and whereas crisis comms is very immediate, and you've got to communicate before you've got all the answers, and it's okay to say that. So you shift from this planned, this is a thought leadership piece I'm going to do, this is the media piece I'm going to do, this is the stakeholder piece or the staff piece that I'm going to do, to, whoa, it's all I can do is communicate now. And I don't have I don't have all the decks and the briefings that I would normally have. I've just got to go with the information that I've got. And I think then, as well as the being human piece, your tone becomes really important. It's not about being the polished leader that can stand up behind a lectern and deliver a superb speech. It's the leader that can make people think, okay, that they're being honest, their intent is right, I trust them. And so tone is what, it can't just be that monotone delivery. The tone is really, really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, being part of the region and growing up, being Arab myself, storytelling has always been something that is passed down, right? Like the hakawati, it's part of our culture and who we are. And actually, when we tell stories, it's how we make people feel. It's why it resonates way more than just talking points, right? Like, I think there's a stat, like, stories are remembered 22 times more than facts. Great. Well, come show up. Like, they'll tell stories about you. It'll be how people, it's how you make them feel. And I think what you said is just like showing up. I also know it's really hard for leaders. A lot of times leaders are in these positions because they're actually really technically strong, but not every leader has the training that they need to be able to show up. They don't have that. It doesn't feel natural to them. Some of us it does, and that's okay. And for others it doesn't. And I know public speaking is, a huge fear that a lot of people experience. Maybe I'd love to know, like, how do you advise leaders who are feeling a bit apprehensive about just showing up and saying something to appease people and to give them that assurance? Because they're just like, I don't have the answers. There's no point. I'm going to say something wrong. How would you advise them in your role today to actually do that and be present and say anything rather than nothing?
Yeah, so saying something is better than saying nothing. And, I would advise them not to wait for certainty, because who knows, can you imagine this? We're 31 days into this conflict now. And if on day one you said, well, let's wait until we know a little bit more about it, and people are still waiting, so you can't wait. Don't be defensive. So some people, when they don't have all the answers, they can be very defensive. You can't be defensive in a situation like this, because no one has all the answers. No one expects you to have all the answers. But they do expect you to show up. Empathy is really, really important. And, I saw through COVID, some leaders have a real lack of empathy. Their lives were set up in a very traditional fashion, male leaders, female homemaker looking after the children. So the idea of kids homeschooling didn't occur to them, yet not all of their staff had that more traditional setup. And so, you had to really push and call them out on that lack of empathy. So, have empathy. Don't be inconsistent. If you say we're going to convene again tomorrow, even if there's nothing to say. We've had the conversations at FGS Global where we've said, oh, okay, shall we do tomorrow? Yeah, let's do tomorrow, because it brings everyone together. Even if there's not a lot to say, let's get everyone on a call together. It's really important to see people's faces, to hear from people, give people the opportunity to ask questions, listen to people, because talking, communication is not just talking, it's listening as well. And I think that the listening element in this environment or a crisis of this nature is well, any crisis really is crucial. And don't focus solely on reputation. Focus on the reality that you're currently living, because that will make you a little bit more authentic. I just think that being human piece is so important.
So important. I love what you said, just kind of like, just it's better to communicate than to not say anything at all. Come up, say I don't have all the answers. I think empathic communication, again, for a lot of leaders who are hard on performance, and maybe they need, like, they would love to know what that sounds like, right? I mean, from my perspective, it sounds like it's really hard for all of us. I can understand how that must be challenging. Or for us, it sounds like, how are you really doing today? Not how are you really doing? What are some of the ways that you would advise executives to introduce empathy into their language? What does that sound like for those in the audience who are thinking, I agree with you, Claire, and I still don't know how I would show up to my stand-up the next day with that language?
Yeah. And I think that's where the leadership collective is really important. And being able to have those honest conversations within that leadership collective. And, there are always people who have different emotional, EQ levels, and who have different empathy levels. So find your go-to person who does have high levels of EQ, and say to them, I want to ask this, but it just feels wrong. Is there a different way of asking it? But also, don't second guess yourself. That was your best friend there. What would you ask them? And stop thinking it's got to be in leadership speak. Think about being a human being. And if you don't feel entirely comfortable doing that, do an intro and then pass to one of the other leadership team that does feel more comfortable, because we do all have different styles of communicating, and it doesn't sit naturally with everybody to, be warm and cuddly. So acknowledge that and use the leadership collective to the greater benefit of the business.
It's honestly such a powerful tool to say that, like, how am I showing up today? How are you showing up today? I know for our leadership team, it was like, you can always count on Tala to come with the energy and the smiles. And so if one of us wasn't able to show up with that, I would be like, you know what, let me open the session. Like, no worries. Like, let me do that if that's what the team needs. I want to ask you also, it was a question I had and something that Razan is asking in the chat. Sometimes as leaders, we can say something that unintentionally creates anxiety. And sometimes leaders get it wrong. I know we want to, try and help them find that language, but it's true. It happens. You show up and in the press or with your customers, you haven't landed it. What are some of the ways that you see leaders tend to get it wrong that isn't just not saying anything, but what are some of the things that actually do come out of their mouth and in writing that you're like, I think I would not have said that in that way?
For me, it's lack of preparation.
Okay.
And particularly if they're operating in an environment where they're needed to be a bit more, warm and cuddly, where they're not entirely comfortable. If you let them shoot from the hip, it's going to go wrong. So if they are public facing, I would advise anyone that I work with to rehearse, not have an absolute script, but adapt those bullet points to your style of delivery, but know exactly the points that you need to land, so you don't start going off for a wander and taking that story somewhere else. And when I've seen people do it wrong, it's when they've just gone, yeah, don't worry about the briefing documents, I'm fine, I've got that, yeah. And then they might land point number one, and then they go off on a wander and it goes wrong. So for me, it's preparedness.
Yeah, absolutely. I think and honestly with generative AI, like you can use them as a test, right? Like you can just go to ChatGPT and say, I think I want to say this, what do you think? And it will really help you in that lens. We talked about like what empathic communication can sound like, and I know it's so important for people to be heard. And you said something earlier, which is about listening. I think not a lot of leaders do that. They don't stop and listen. They feel that they need to come and communicate, but actually communication is the sending and receiving of messages. And so receiving, we know that active listening is what builds trust. And active listening not just defined as I can hear what you're saying, but I'm really listening. I'm attuned to the nuance of what's in your voice, and that requires a bit of facilitation, requires a leader to be there. What are some of the best ways that you've heard leaders kind of sense and listen as part of communication? Like, what are some of the rituals or the practices that you've heard leaders integrate in either internal or external audiences that help them really get a sense of what's happening in a crisis before just, like you're saying, shooting from the hip or reacting with a comms piece,
I think for me, it's allowing space for people to talk, and recognizing that not everybody is comfortable, maybe in an all-staff town hall that's virtual, putting your hand up and asking a question. Some people are very confident in that environment, some people aren't. So you can't just listen to the confident people. Yeah. It's then saying, okay, now here's a mechanism for you to send your questions in, or how are we distilling down into smaller groups now, to the ICC through COVID, we would have all staff town halls, and then we would have daily small team groups. And then we also buddied up people. So everyone had buddies across different teams. So there was always an opportunity for someone to talk and someone to listen, and for the leadership team to get a better understanding. We weren't relying on one form of communication and letting the noisy people speak. You have to create an environment, or a number of environments, where everyone can speak and tell you how they're feeling. And then that may need you to course correct your comms, or evolve your comms and evolve your messaging. But don't just assume, okay, I had 200 people on a call. I asked who would like to ask questions. I got 8 questions in. They were really good questions. Done. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Because there are another 28 on that call that think there's no way on this earth I could put my hand up and ask a question in front of all of these people. So how are you facilitating those people to ask the questions, or feel comfortable asking the questions? So you're listening to the whole, not just the noisy few.
Yeah, I love that you shared that example. Thank you. So many leaders are like, yeah, we did it, right? We had that town hall. They didn't have questions. Well, it's so daunting to be in the audience in front of 200 people and ask a question as vulnerable as, am I going to lose my job? Are you making salary cuts? People don't want to be the person who said that. I know that Majid Al-Futtaim, an organization here, had a really great crisis response in COVID. Actually, they would have anonymous fishbowl sessions where you could submit questions in advance. And the CEO at the time, he was sat there in his office, took his jacket off, just was very direct speaking to the people. And he said, I get that it's hard to ask these questions, so please feel free to anonymously send them. We have no way of knowing who this is. We really want to make sure that you have that space. And at scale, that's one way that works. But I think another way for smaller, leaders in smaller organizations is we forget that a really effective channel for listening and distributing communication are layers of leadership, middle managers. I remember we did an internal comm strategy, and the CEO was like, why do you have middle managers as the channel? Is that an error? I'm like, no, actually, on the contrary, that is your superpower. Those are the people who are very close to the the majority of your staff, and they are great at, if you design the mechanism for there to collect and receive feedback through them, actually you have a beautiful dashboard of data, right? That can tell you like how people are feeling. So I think for smaller organizations, it's bringing your middle managers together to give them the tools to show up themselves, and also to help hear from them what they're seeing that's closer to the realities. Because a lot of times leaders, they're in the boardroom, they're not on the office floor, right? So to help with them with that.
Yeah. And it's preempting questions as well. If you listen to the radio in the morning and you'll hear the same questions being asked. So answer those questions in your comms, because if they're asking, if that leader is on the radio talking about those questions or talking about the answers to those questions, then it's pretty much certain that the people in your organization are asking the same questions. So preempt them, understand what those questions might be.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for saying that. It's so important, actually. Something leaders often can overlook. And it's just like they'll do what they can to manage the crisis externally, but then their employees are hearing it for the first time on the radio, and they're like, wait, why don't you share that with us, right? So I do want us to talk about audiences in just a minute. But before that, actually, it's a question I wanted to ask you. We talked a lot about the empathy piece. I want to talk about the direct piece. Holly in the chat is asking, I'm a leader who knows the job really well, but I've never been trained on people management. I'm trying my best. How do I show up for my team to make us all to come together with purpose rather than being overly empathetic and ending up taking on their load to ease them? I think leaders would definitely be struggling with that. It's to say that, look, at some point we do need to make sure that the business there is continuity. Like Holly, in her case, taking on the load of her team, well, that's unsustainable. And you're going to get a leader who could burn out. So I'd really love to know, how do we then balance this need to be empathic and to show up human and authentic, but also be direct and do our best to drive progress and continuity forward?
Yeah, firstly, I think, Holly, I hear you. I think we're all just doing our best right now. I think that's what any of us can do. But yeah, I think that's really important. And it goes back to the listening piece. And it's not all of your burden to carry. It's got to be a shared burden, because what you also have to realize is we're all going through this. Leaders are going through this as well. And we're not immune to any of the feelings any of our teams are having. So we're able to recognize those feelings. We're able to allow team members to step back if they are, going into meltdown or having a tough time. But equally, and one of the things that I've counseled some of our team on is get on with the work, because ultimately you're giving your day a framework, and that will save you. During COVID, work was my savior, because it gave me the get up, work out, eat breakfast, start work, have my meetings, and it gave structure to my day that I didn't realize quite how much I needed. So the fact that we still have work to go, and that I have been relatively tough with a couple of people of, please just get on with your work, because it will benefit the business in the long run, but it will also benefit you, because if you're not doing this, what will you be doing? You're going to be doom scrolling. You're going to be watching the news and thinking, oh my gosh, what is happening? So it's recognizing the roller coaster that we're on. No one is flatlining right now. No one is not feeling anything. So acknowledge when people are having dips, but also say, come on, we need you all to show up. I need to show up as a leader, but I need my team to show up as well. We can, there's an open, safe space to be vulnerable when you need to. But equally, if you're a high-performing team, I want us to continue to be a high-performing team during this period, because that will give us the best opportunity of success bouncing out of this. If we all just put the brakes on now and said, oh, it's a little bit tough, things will fall apart a whole lot quicker. So let's try and keep normal business as usual going as much as possible, because it aids us all. It keeps us all busy.
Absolutely. I think the chairman of Amar used to always say this really beautiful thing, which is that work is a gift, and it can be a gift, and to be productive and to give yourself purpose and to focus on the value that you can create in the environment, in the career that you've chosen is one. I think another thing that Wissam is asking in the chat is really relevant, which is that we look to our leaders for direction, right? And he's, as an executive coach and advisor, he says, I see a lot of leaders who feel like they're in the firing line during a crisis, with employees firing questions at them, expecting them to fix everything. What position do you advise leaders to take in these situations? How do they balance between, okay, I'm here to support you, and keeping people empowered and feeling accountable, so that they create that? What would you advise them?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because as a leader, it is your role to drive things forward. But it's, I think, and the middle management layer that you spoke about earlier has a really important role to play there, because they can distill what is coming from the top lower down, particularly in those larger organizations. But also, if it's a smaller organization, buddy people up, buddy small groups up. At the ICC, we had our leadership team was split into small buddy groups. I had 2 buddies, and they probably got me through COVID. We had check-ins regularly. We had good days. We had bad days. They were all different. And it enabled us to, that it wasn't all on the CEO. When we were having a bad day, the whole leadership team wasn't going, oh my gosh, this is a nightmare. We were able to do it to each other, and we knew it was a safe space. But we were able to kind of pull each other out of that. And I then replicated it into my team, and then we kind of replicated that across the business, because we realized actually the stress can't always go upwards. Sometimes people just need to be heard. And I'll never forget my daughter, when she was probably about 11 or 12, came home with a problem. And so I immediately go into solution mode. And she said, Mama, I don't need you to fix it. I just want you to listen to me. And then I'm okay. And actually, that's a lesson that I've then taken forward into my leadership, which is, I sometimes ask my team, do you want me to fix this, or do I just need to hear you? And sometimes it's just hear, and then you move on. If people feel like they have been heard, that's enough. They don't necessarily need your action.
Yeah, it's so true. I think a lot of times we forget. We forget that sometimes we want to jump in and provide solutions, but a lot of time, like, people they can get through it. And to your point with Wissam's question, it's just about really saying, well, like, here's what I can help you with, and here's what I can't, right? And here's where we draw that line, and here's where you can also help yourself, because we're going through this together. Like, I'm here in this with you. You've talked on leadership teams, and I really want us to go there, because for us, it's a lot of the nature of the work that we do is in leadership team development, helping them operate as one, helping them be aligned from a structure level, from a comms, aligning them. How do you see leadership teams communicating effectively in a crisis? What are the tools that they use? What keeps them, operating as a chorus, as you beautifully say?
Yeah, I think I sound like a stuck record, and I'm sorry. Pre-planning, pre-thinking all of those scenarios, what happens if. So having your crisis work done prior to any crisis, knowing, we may not have known that this conflict was on its way, but having a plan of action in place, knowing who communicates with who. So not everything, what are the cascades, both internally and externally? We at the ICC, we had that very clearly mapped out. We had a crisis playbook, and in that was every cascade for every stakeholder. Everyone knew their role, who was talking to who, pre-agreed lines on all these different scenarios. We did a lot of scenario planning, and everyone hated it. So every World Cup event, I'd be like, right, okay, let's update the crisis playbook. These are your cascades, right? Okay, please look at all these pre-planned messages. Let's get them all pre-approved. And everyone would be like, oh God, and it'd be right at the bottom of everybody's list. But you can guarantee at every event, the playbook wasn't something that went into a drawer and gathered dust. It was utilized, and everyone, guarantee every event, everyone would go, okay, you were right. So having that playbook, having being pre-planned is really important. And then simple tools during a crisis, like a messaging house. And again, don't just assume, right, these are our messages on day one of the conflict. They may be different on day 31. So evolve those messages and use official guidance in a national crisis, because that gives you a reference point which staff can relate to, and it becomes a whole lot less emotional, because often people get very emotional in a crisis. So an official guidance takes a lot of the emotion out of any decision making as well. So use that. Use horizon scanning, use social listening to understand what the conversations are out there. It's what I said earlier about, if you're hearing questions on the radio, invariably your team might have them. So what are the conversations that are going on out there? So you've got a big view of the crisis, rather than, we're very prone to navel gazing during a crisis and worrying about what happens here, as opposed to what's the big picture. And you still, during any major issue, you need an eye on the big picture and your strategy and your North Star. So that enables you to do that horizon scanning.
And it's a question that came to me around stakeholders and the audiences. We talk a lot about audience centricity and making sure that we talked about our teams a lot and the people. But, a lot of leaders that might be tuning in have different stakeholders. They have boards, they have their customers or beneficiaries, they have their partners and vendors. They have so many people they need to communicate with. What does that matrix, how do you prioritize within that matrix of stakeholders? How, is it everybody? Is it, how do you structure your communication in such a way that, do you prioritize? Is it everybody all at once? What is your advice for somebody who's looking at 10 groups of humans that they have to answer to and they don't know where to begin?
Yeah. And that's where the planning is really important, because you have your matrix, you have your stakeholder matrix, and then you have the cascade system. So who is responsible for what? So the CEO is responsible for the staff and the board. The chief commercial officer will be responsible, for example, for commercial partners and broadcast partners. The chief communications officer is responsible for the media, and you go on like that. So then you start through COVID, we would have initially daily touch-ins about who needed to hear what at what point, and we were taking decisions almost on a daily basis about global events, and would they still go ahead and wouldn't they still go ahead. So we would have to say every day, who needs to know? And that's a question you need to ask on a regular basis. Who needs to know? You have your stakeholder matrix there, and you can go, okay, we need to tell X, Y, and Z this. So A, B, and C, that's your job. This is and that's the message that you're going to give them. And that's where the consistency and the regularity of the messaging comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that structure is so helpful. One thing I'd love to add is something that, especially in the GCC, we have very diverse populations. We are a beautiful melting pot of cultures, but cross-cultural communication is something we have to keep top of mind. How does somebody perceive this message? How does somebody in their context, what would this sound like? Are we low context communicators? Are we high context? And I think the work of Erin Myers is amazing. She has the culture map, and she has this beautiful scale of the dimensions. And one of them is, how to receive feedback, how do we communicate? And it's something that we often invite our leaders to think about, is to say, when you're choosing your words and when you're choosing how how to show up, who is your audience? And what do they, like you're saying, what are their information needs? And also, what is the best channel to communicate to them? We had, during the pandemic, a webinar with the head of comms at Kareem and Talabat, and both of them were like, actually, to speak to our riders on the front line, we don't use any email. We use WhatsApp, or we use an app. I think being selective about the channels and knowing your audience and language and how they receive information is so helpful. And leaders just tend to think I'll just spray one message and everybody, here you go. But you can craft it and tailor it. And that's actually what really helps it land. So I wanted to add to that. Thank you. I have one final thought before I need to move us on to our lightning round. Honestly, I could speak to you for 6 hours, Claire. I really could. But maybe as a final thought, for a leader who's sat there being like, okay, well, what do I need to do? What makes communication effective in a crisis? What's your advice to them that they should focus on when it comes to building trust and maintaining that?
Show up. Be human. Do not wait until you know everything. And show empathy would be my key points. But showing up is so important. I think that's the most important. Show up as a decent human being, and that will. I don't think you can necessarily build trust. You've hopefully got a base of trust from which you can then spring, and showing up and being human will help you do that.
Yeah, thank you for that. We have so many questions in the chat. I just want to let our audience know that we weren't able to get to all of them. But what I do want to say is maybe Claire, myself, or you can jump on LinkedIn afterwards and answer them asynchronously. We're really grateful for everybody who is helping shape this conversation. I do have to take us to our lightning round, and I actually asked you one of the questions already, but maybe just something for you, Claire. I'd love to know what keeps you grounded.
Lifting weights and sunrise and sunset. I have to see one of the two during a day.
Beautiful. And what helps you be limitless?
I like to call it my curiosity. I think my family would call it my nosiness, but yeah, curious.
I can relate. I always say I could ask questions I could ask anybody 100,000 questions. And you know, as somebody who's been operating in the region for quite some time, I'd love for you to kind of share your perspective on what is the one leadership quality from the Arab world that the rest of the world can learn from?
I'm going to be cheeky and take two here, because I think the thing that I've learned the most and that I've seen in, you know, boatloads over the last 31 days is relationships and trust. And I think we can go a long way. The relationships that the UAE have built over the years, not just with its citizens, but externally, are so important. But I think trust, they've worked so hard to create and build trust, and that's an inherent thing within the Arab culture, trust and relationships. And I think we can all learn from that.
Beautiful. Trust. I couldn't agree more, actually. As somebody who is Arab, I think that like we are a collectivist culture, and so we really believe in the power of community. It's so important to us to have people around us. We'll be talking a lot about that in some of the upcoming sessions. Actually, we have an entire section dedicated to relationships and the power of it and how community can carry you through. So yeah, I do agree. It is sad, but it is my job to also make sure that I wrap us up today. Claire, I just want to really thank you. This conversation has been so practical, so layered, and so insightful. I've learned a lot from you. I can tell from the audience they have. So I just want to extend my gratitude for giving us your time and sharing your wisdom with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're most welcome. I just want to again thank our audience for everybody tuning in. Your attention, your questions, comments has really helped shape a remarkable and group learning experience. For those of you who were unable to attend the whole session, we will be sharing this as a recording on our YouTube page as a podcast in case you want to go for a walk or lift weights. And if there is somebody in your network who might find this conversation useful, please do pass it along. And if you found value in today's session, I want to share two things. The first is that we are conducting primary research on leadership in the Arab world. We have a survey, and we want to capture how leaders in the region are navigating uncertainty. We'd love for you to please give us 4 minutes of your time to share your thoughts with us. And the second one is really similar to a topic we covered with Holly's question, but I want to bring it back, is we are going to be hosting a session on Monday at noon, so in 6 days, called a manager mailbag. We are inviting managers of all levels to come and share what are the questions that you have. How can we help you lead through this time? A lot of the resources through this conference are focused on senior executives, but we do want to offer middle managers an opportunity to get clarity on how you need to show up, because I always say, like, the middle squeeze is real. Managing up, managing down is not easy. So the team will drop a link to a form in the chat, and we'd love for your questions. We will be continuing this conversation throughout the next 3 weeks. And actually, there's 2 more sessions I want to tell you about. The first one is this afternoon. My partner in crime, Marie Nachle, is going to be speaking with Dr. Connie Hadley around the power of human connection and uncertainty. That's taking place today at, let's say, 5 p.m. UAE time, right here on LinkedIn Live. And tomorrow we have a workshop with Daniel Delati, who's a facilitator and advisor that I can't recommend enough. We're having a session on purpose and how to show up authentically in your leadership. So please register to attend that tomorrow at April 1st, 9 a.m. UAE time. With that, I just want to close this out. Thank you so much. Please stay connected to us. Please see you at the other sessions. And Claire, thank you once again. Lots of gratitude to everyone in attendance.